2 patrol cars, my driveway, all because I said 5 little words. I'm not in your HOA. This power-drunk HOA president had been making my life hell for weeks. Bogus fines, harassment letters, treating a decorated Army veteran like some kind of criminal. The second I told her the truth, she called 911 claiming I was threatening the community. But while she was busy trying to destroy me, I discovered something buried in my uncle's dusty old files. Something that flipped everything upside down. Something that made me realize she wasn't just wrong about having authority over me, she was about to find out I had authority over her. What would you do if someone called the cops on you for telling the truth? Drop a comment with where you're watching from, because what I'm about to reveal will blow your mind. My name's Marcus Thornfield, and 6 months ago I thought retirement meant peace. 28 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, figured I'd earned the right to fly my flag without someone breathing down my neck. Wrong. I inherited 47 acres from Great Uncle Ezra, an eccentric old coot who hoarded legal documents like a pack rat. His property sat in the middle of what's now Millbrook Heights, a subdivision full of McMansions and people who treat grass height like a moral issue. The 1950s farmhouse had character. Wrap-around porch with hand-hewn posts, floors that creaked stories with every step. Uncle Ezra's basement was packed with document boxes, the musty paper scent mixing with my boots echoing on concrete. I should have paid attention to those papers from day one. Then I met Vivian Ashworth, and my peaceful retirement went straight to hell. Picture a woman who probably iron presses her underwear and color coordinates her sock drawer. 58, silver hair shellacked into submission, drives a Lexus SUV with bored Prius vanity plates. She's been HOA dictator for 6 years, treating 800 families like personal subjects in her little kingdom. My neighbor Tom Bradley, retired firefighter who brought me coffee that first week, filled me in on her reign of terror. That psycho fined the Miller family $300 because their kid's sidewalk chalk was non-approved colors, made the Johnsons rip out their vegetable garden for being agriculturally inconsistent with residential standards. She once measured my grass with an actual ruler and threatened a lien over half an inch. The woman was clearly unhinged, but I figured she'd leave me alone. My property obviously wasn't part of their precious subdivision. I installed a 25-foot flagpole my first week, Old Glory flying proud, POW MIA flag underneath, plus a simple wooden sign, Thornfield Ranch Est, 1847. Nothing fancy, just honest American pride on American soil. Day 3. Here comes the Wicked Witch herself, marching up my gravel driveway like she owned every inch of dirt in the county. The sharp click of her heels against stones sounded like a death march, clutching that citation book like it was the Constitution itself. Sir, your flagpole exceeds our 20-foot height restrictions. That sign requires Architectural Committee pre-approval before installation. I was fixing fence posts, sweat dripping, hands dirty from honest work. The smell of creosote and fresh-cut lumber filled the air. Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not in your HOA. Her face turned the color of a fire engine. Everyone in this community follows our covenants and restrictions. Check your property maps, I said, staying calm. This land predates your subdivision by 50 years. Didn't matter. She slapped a $250 citation under my truck's windshield anyway. When I called their office to explain the situation politely, her assistant basically told me to go pound sand in language that would make a drill sergeant blush. That's when Uncle Ezra's voice echoed in my head. Boy, when someone starts throwing their weight around, it's time to check who actually has the power. The county recorder's office became my weekend destination. Mrs. Rodriguez, the clerk who'd worked there 30 years, lit up when she heard my last name. Ezra Thornfield. That man was a legend around here. Never saw anyone read contracts more carefully than your uncle. She pulled out a thick manila file. Your uncle granted road access to the original developer back in 1996. But look at this specific clause right here. The document said, road access contingent on maintenance of private roadway standards. When I asked what that meant exactly, Mrs. Rodriguez grinned like she was sharing a secret. Your uncle let them build roads across his property, but he never actually transferred ownership of the roads themselves. Crafty old devil kept everything. Mineral rights, water rights, road ownership. They can use them, but he still owns them. Driving home, everything started looking different. Every street in Millbrook Heights, Heritage Circle, Founders Way, Elm Creek Trail, They were all built on land that belonged to Uncle Ezra's original 47 acres. That night, surrounded by the smell of old leather and yellowing paper in his basement, I found his final letter dated 2019. Marcus, if you're reading this, some fools probably tried to push you around. Time to remind them who really runs this show. You're absolutely right. Let me recount and rewrite to exactly 800 words. Vivian didn't waste time making my life hell. The morning after our little chat, I found 3 more citations plastered across my front door like legal graffiti. $50 for unapproved exterior lighting, my porch light that had been there since Eisenhower was president. Another 100 for non-conforming vehicle storage because my work truck was parked in my own driveway. And my favorite, $200 for failure to maintain approved landscaping standards. The woman was citing me for dandelions on a working ranch. I called the HOA office again, got transferred to their property manager, some kid named Derek, who sounded like he was reading from a script. Sir, all residents must comply with architectural guidelines regardless of property age. Son, I'm not a resident of your HOA. Check your plat maps. Mrs. Ashworth says boundary disputes don't exempt anyone from community standards. That's when I knew we were dealing with someone who'd rather be wrong with authority than right without it. But Vivian escalated things. Next morning, I heard gravel crunching and looked out to see some guy with a clipboard and camera wandering around my property, taking pictures of everything from my barns peeling paint to my chickens. She'd hired a private property inspector to document violations on my land. The smell of fresh manure from the chicken coop mixed with morning coffee as I watched this fool climb over my fence to photograph my non-conforming agricultural structures. That's when Uncle Ezra's lessons came flooding back. During my Army days, he'd always said water rights and mineral rights often stayed with original owners, even after development. Always check what subsurface rights you own. They're worth more than folks realize. This inspector was trespassing to photograph violations that didn't legally exist. So I documented him right back, taking pictures of him climbing my fence. Then I called the sheriff. Deputy Martinez showed up 20 minutes later. Good man, knew Uncle Ezra personally. The morning air carried honeysuckle scent as Martinez examined the inspector's authorization letter. Marcus, what's the problem? Got a trespasser taking pictures for some HOA nonsense. The inspector started sputtering about community standards enforcement, waving around Vivian's authorization letter. Martinez read it over, coffee steaming from his thermos. Sir, this gives you permission to inspect HOA properties. This isn't an HOA property. But Mrs. Ashworth said, Mrs. Ashworth doesn't authorize trespassing on private property outside her jurisdiction. The inspector left with a warning and no pictures, but Vivian was just getting started. That afternoon, she showed up with reinforcements, 2 board members and their lawyer. Fancy suits standing on my porch like they were serving federal papers. Their dress shoes clicking against wooden deck sounded like fingernails on chalkboard. Mr. Thornfield, we're prepared to offer a solution to this boundary confusion. I leaned against my doorframe, sipping sweet tea and watching these city folks sweat in uncomfortable clothes. I'm listening. The lawyer pulled out a contract. We'd like to offer honorary membership in Millbrook Heights HOA, reduced dues, grandfathered violations, and you keep your flagpole. In exchange for what? Simple compliance with our basic community standards going forward. I read their generous offer. They wanted me to sign away property rights, submit to their architectural review board, and pay $300 monthly for the privilege of following their rules on my own land. Folks, that's mighty kind, I said, handing back their contract. But I'll pass. Vivian's face turned purple. Mr. Thornfield, we're trying to be reasonable. Ma'am, I don't need permission to be reasonable on my own property. After they left, I called Mrs. Rodriguez at the county office. Time to dig deeper into those subsurface rights Uncle Ezra had protected. Ezra filed for exclusive water pumping rights back in 1962, she told me. Covers the entire aquifer under the subdivision. Annual renewal fee of $50, automatically renewed unless canceled. My heart raced as implications hit me. Uncle Ezra hadn't just collected documents, he'd built a fortress of legal protections. That evening, Tom Bradley came by with a 6-pack and disturbing news. Barbecue smoke drifted from someone's backyard while we sat on my porch, watching sunset over Vivian's manicured kingdom. Vivian's been calling contractors around town, telling them not to do business with you, says you're problematic and fighting community improvement efforts. She's also posting on Nextdoor about dangerous elements moving into the neighborhood. Direct quote, Military individuals with anti-authority attitudes who refuse basic community standards. Now she was attacking my service record. That crossed a line. I spent that night reading Uncle Ezra's papers by lamplight, musty document smell filling the room. That's when I found the 1963 easement agreement that made me smile. Uncle Ezra had negotiated maintenance authority over the subdivision's entire drainage system. Every storm drain, every culvert, every piece of infrastructure keeping Millbrook Heights from flooding. Uncle Ezra had legal oversight and emergency access rights, which meant I now had authority to inspect drainage systems throughout the entire subdivision, including the storm drain running directly under Vivian's perfect front yard. Time to pay her a neighborly visit. I showed up at Vivian's house Tuesday morning with my clipboard, measuring tape, and the biggest smile I could manage. Her front lawn looked like something out of a magazine, every blade of grass the exact same height, flower beds arranged with military precision. The woman probably used a ruler to trim each individual blade. She answered the door in a bathrobe that cost more than my truck payment, coffee mug in hand, looking like she'd rather be getting a root canal. "Mr. Thornfield, what are you doing here?" "Morning, ma'am. Just need to inspect the drainage easement under your property. Routine maintenance check." I held up the 1963 easement agreement, complete with official county seal. Her face went through 6 different shades of confusion before settling on angry red. "You can't just walk onto my property." "Actually, I can. Your house sits right over the main storm drain for this subdivision. My great-uncle negotiated maintenance rights, and those transferred to me." The smell of her expensive perfume mixed with fresh-cut grass and morning dew. You could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process this information. "This is harassment." "No, ma'am. This is infrastructure maintenance. Would you prefer I schedule through your HOA office? I'm sure Derek would love the paperwork." She slammed the door so hard it rattled the windows, but I'd gotten what I came for, confirmation she had no clue what legal rights Uncle Ezra had woven into this neighborhood's foundation. 10 minutes later, she escalated in exactly the way I'd expected. Instead of calling her lawyer or even Derek, she dialed 911, told them a dangerous veteran was threatening her family with fake legal documents. 2 patrol cars arrived while I was measuring the storm drain access point in her backyard. The sound of car doors slamming echoed off perfect houses like gunshots in suburbia. "Sir, step away from the property and put your hands visible." I recognized Officer Johnson from my morning coffee runs. Good guy, just doing his job. I slowly pulled out the easement agreement and property deed, moving like I was handling explosives. "Officers, I'm conducting legally authorized drainage maintenance on infrastructure. I have easement rights to inspect." Vivian came running out in her bathrobe, practically hyperventilating. "He's been harassing our family for weeks, making threats, ignoring community standards, threatening our safety." Sergeant Williams, Johnson's partner, stepped forward. Older guy with gray temples who'd probably seen every flavor of neighborhood drama. He examined my paperwork while morning air filled with the distant hum of leaf blowers from 3 different yards, because apparently 8 a.m. was lawn maintenance hour in suburbia. "Ma'am, these documents appear legitimate. This gentleman has legal authority to inspect drainage infrastructure on this easement. But he can't just walk onto my property whenever he wants." "Actually," Williams said, reading the fine print, "according to this 1963 agreement, he can, with reasonable notice during business hours." Watching Vivian's face was like watching a Windows computer crash in real time. Red to purple to gray to something approaching translucent. "This is insane. I'm calling my lawyer immediately." "That's your right, ma'am, but right now, this gentleman isn't violating any laws." After the officers left, I finished my inspection, taking pictures of perfectly functional drainage and making notes about potential future maintenance needs. The real victory was watching Vivian realize she'd called the cops on someone with legal authority to be exactly where he was standing, but Vivian wasn't done playing dirty. That afternoon, my insurance company called. Someone had filed a complaint claiming my property was creating safety hazards for surrounding communities. They wanted to inspect my dangerous agricultural activities and unpermitting threatening structures. When I asked who filed the complaint, they couldn't say. But they could tell me it came with photographs and a detailed report about livestock creating health risks and unpermitted structures threatening neighborhood property values. I'd been raising chickens and maintaining that barn for 6 months without issues. Now suddenly I was a public menace. That evening, Tom Bradley arrived with beer and intelligence that made everything click. The the smell of his Marlboros mixed with honeysuckle as we sat on my porch watching the sun set over Vivian's kingdom. She's been busy, called county health about your chickens, filed code enforcement complaints about your barn, and here's the best part. She's telling neighbors you're planning massive commercial farming expansion. Commercial farming? Says you're bringing in pigs, maybe cattle. Turn the whole area into industrial agriculture that'll destroy everyone's property values and create unbearable stench. The woman was waging psychological warfare, trying to turn my neighbors against me before I realized what hit me, but she'd made one crucial mistake, fighting someone who'd spent decades planning military operations. I pulled out Uncle Ezra's water rights documentation, showing Tom the real scope of my inheritance. Not just drainage easements. Uncle Ezra controlled groundwater pumping rights for the entire subdivision. Every well, every irrigation system, every drop keeping those perfect lawns green. Tom, what happens when those pretty lawns can't get watered? His grin was like watching someone discover buried treasure. You beautiful, evil genius. Wednesday morning brought a surprise that made my coffee taste like battery acid. I was feeding my chickens when a black sedan pulled up, followed by a white van with Millbrook Property Management painted on the side. Out stepped Vivian, her lawyer, and 3 guys in coveralls carrying surveying equipment. The crunch of dress shoes on gravel sounded like trouble marching up my driveway. "Mr. Thornfield," the lawyer called out, "we're here to conduct an official boundary survey to resolve this property dispute." I wiped chicken feed off my hands, the smell of fresh morning air mixing with diesel exhaust from their van. One of my hens chose that moment to let out a squawk that sounded like she was commenting on our uninvited guests. "Folks, there's no property dispute. County records are clear about where my land ends and yours begins." "Nevertheless," Vivian said, clutching a manila folder, "we've hired professional surveyors to establish definitive boundaries." That's when I noticed something fishy. These weren't county surveyors or licensed professionals. The equipment looked official, but the guys carrying it had Millbrook Property Management shirts. They worked for the HOA. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Y'all are welcome to survey your property, but if those instruments cross onto my land, we're gonna have problems." The head surveyor, a nervous guy who kept adjusting his glasses, looked between me and Vivian like he was watching a tennis match where someone was about to get beheaded. "Sir, we need to establish accurate property lines. That might require measurements from multiple reference points." "Multiple points on whose property?" "Well, to be thorough, we'd need access to my land without my permission for a survey I didn't request." Vivian's face went fire engine red. "Mr. Thornfield, this is a legitimate boundary survey. Ma'am, this is 3 guys with measuring tape trying to find excuses to declare parts of my property belong to your HOA." But here's where Vivian showed her true colors. While I was arguing with the lawyer, she quietly directed the surveyors to start measuring anyway. They began setting up equipment on my side of the fence line. That's when I made a discovery that nearly gave me a heart attack. I walked over to watch and noticed something that made my blood pressure spike. They weren't just surveying the boundary between my property and the subdivision, they were specifically measuring the road easements, the exact strips where Uncle Ezra's road ownership documentation applied. These people were trying to create fraudulent surveys that would prove the HOA owned the roads. I called Sheriff Martinez immediately. "Deputy, I've got trespassers conducting unauthorized surveys and attempting to falsify property boundaries." 20 minutes later, Martinez rolled up. The morning air carried honeysuckle scent and brewing legal trouble as he examined their paperwork. "Ma'am, do you have permission from the property owner to conduct surveys on his land?" "We don't need permission," Vivian snapped. "We're establishing community boundaries." "You absolutely need permission. And sir," he turned to the head surveyor, "are you licensed to conduct official boundary surveys?" The guy's face went white. "Well, no, but we're just taking measurements For what? Creating fraudulent property documentation?" Martinez ordered them off my property and warned them about filing false boundary records. But as they were leaving, I overheard Vivian on her phone, and what she said made my blood freeze. "The measurements confirm what we suspected. File the paperwork tomorrow. We'll claim adverse possession of the roadways based on 25 years of maintenance without owner objection." Adverse possession. I remembered that term from Army legal briefings. It's how squatters can steal property if the real owner doesn't fight back long enough. Vivian was trying to legally steal my roads through paperwork fraud. That afternoon, I burned rubber getting to Mrs. Rodriguez at the county office. She took one look at my face and knew something serious was happening. "Marcus, what's wrong?" I explained Vivian's adverse possession scheme. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled out Uncle Ezra's files and started cross-referencing them with recent filings. Someone filed preliminary adverse possession claims yesterday for road easements throughout Millbrook Heights, claims the HOA has maintained exclusive control for 25 years without owner objection. Can they do that? Not legally. Your uncle renewed his road ownership documentation every year through 2019. There's a clear paper trail of ownership maintenance. But if you hadn't shown up to contest this, they would have stolen your roads in 6 months. I spent that evening going through every document Uncle Ezra left behind, looking for anything else Vivian might try to steal. The basement smelled like old paper and righteous anger as I worked by lamplight. That's when I found something that made me realize how deep Uncle Ezra's planning had gone. Buried in a 1965 filing, I discovered he'd retained mineral rights to the entire area. Not just water and roads, Uncle Ezra owned everything under the ground throughout the subdivision: oil, gas, gravel, even clay deposits. And according to a 1987 geological survey, there was a substantial gravel deposit directly under the community center where the HOA held their monthly meetings. I called Tom Bradley immediately. "Tom, how would you feel about attending the next HOA meeting as my guest?" "Why, what are you planning?" "Just a little educational presentation about property rights. Time this neighborhood learned exactly what Uncle Ezra left me." The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Mrs. Rodriguez from the county office, voice trembling with excitement. "Marcus, you need to get down here immediately. I found something in your uncle's files that's going to blow your mind." I drove to the courthouse faster than was probably legal, the smell of morning coffee and fresh asphalt filling my truck cab. Mrs. Rodriguez was waiting with a stack of documents that looked older than dirt. "I was cross-referencing Ezra's property records to help you fight this adverse possession nonsense. And I found this." She slid a thick folder across the counter. "Your uncle didn't just own roads and mineral rights, he owns the entire subdivision." My heart stopped. "What do you mean the entire subdivision?" "Look at this 1995 deed transfer. The original developer, Millbrook Construction Company, went bankrupt during the housing crisis. When they couldn't pay their construction loans, the bank foreclosed on everything, including the developed lots they hadn't sold yet." She pointed to a highlighted section of legal text. "Your uncle bought the foreclosure package for pennies on the dollar. 847 residential lots, the community center, the playground, even that ridiculous fountain." The room started spinning. "Are you telling me Uncle Ezra owned every house in Millbrook Heights?" "Not the houses themselves, those were sold to individual buyers, but the land underneath them, the lots they sit on, your uncle retained ownership and leased them back to the homeowners through ground leases." I had to sit down before I fell down. Ground leases, I remembered that concept from military housing briefings. It's when you buy a house but essentially rent the dirt it sits on. Most homeowners never realize they're paying rent on land they think they own. Always check if you own fee simple or just a ground lease. The difference can bankrupt you overnight. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled out another document. "Here's the beautiful part. The ground leases were structured as 99-year agreements with automatic renewal clauses. But there's an escape clause that nobody ever reads." "What kind of escape clause?" "If the lessee, that's the homeowner, violates the terms of the lease agreement, the lessor, that's you now, can terminate the lease and reclaim the land." My hands were shaking as I read the fine print. What constitutes a violation? Harassment of the lessor, interference with lessor's property rights, filing false legal claims against the lessor. Basically, everything Vivian's been doing to you for the past 2 months. The implications hit me like a freight train. Vivian hadn't just been harassing some random neighbor. She'd been systematically torturing her landlord, the man who literally owned the ground her house sat on. Does Vivian know about this? Nobody knows. When the HOA was formed in 2001, the management company never did proper title research. They assumed the homeowners owned their lots outright. The ground lease payments were automatically deducted from mortgage payments and sent to a trust account your uncle set up. I flipped through page after page of financial records. For 24 years, every homeowner in Millbrook Heights had been paying Uncle Ezra rent without knowing it. The monthly HOA dues they thought were going to maintenance, a big chunk was actually ground lease payments. "How much money are we talking about?" Mrs. Rodriguez pulled out a calculator. 847 lots at $75 monthly ground lease. That's $760,000 annually. Your uncle collected over $18 million since the subdivision was built. $18 million, sitting in a trust account I now controlled. "There's more," she said, pulling out another folder. "Your uncle documented every lease violation, every HOA overreach, every instance of harassment. He built a legal case for decades. But the final document was what really got me. A handwritten letter addressed to me dated 6 months before Uncle Ezra died. Marcus, if you're reading this, some fool has pushed too far. You now have power to evict 800 families and reclaim $47 million in real estate. Don't use it. Use this knowledge to fix what's broken, not destroy what's salvageable. Make them partners, not enemies. Uncle Ezra had given me the ultimate nuclear option, then asked me to be the bigger man. But he'd also given me absolute leverage to demand whatever changes I wanted. Vivian could try to steal my roads or harass my neighbors all she wanted. At the end of the day, I owned the ground she was standing on. That night, I converted Uncle Ezra's old study into my war room. Maps of the subdivision covered every wall, legal documents spread across the desk like battle plans, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The smell of old leather from Uncle Ezra's chair mixed with fresh ink as I outlined my strategy. I wasn't planning to destroy Vivian or evict 800 families. Uncle Ezra was right. That would just make me the villain. But I was going to teach this neighborhood about respect, accountability, and what happens when you pick fights with people who read the fine print. The plan had 3 phases, each designed to escalate pressure while giving Vivian chances to back down gracefully. Phase 1, build the coalition. First, I needed real allies. I started with neighbors Vivian had victimized. The Millers who got fined for sidewalk chalk, the Johnsons who lost their vegetable garden, anyone who'd felt HOA overreach. Sarah Finley, the pediatric nurse on Elm Creek Trail, was my first recruit. She'd been fighting Vivian for 2 years over playground equipment, racking up thousands in bogus fines. When I showed up with ground lease documents, her jaw dropped. "You're telling me we don't actually own our land?" "Exactly. And every time Vivian harasses you, she's violating your lease agreement, giving me grounds to intervene." Sarah's husband, Mike, an accountant, helped me create a simple presentation explaining ground leases in normal language. We designed it like insurance commercials because most folks had never heard of ground leases, much less realized they were living under one. Phase 2, document everything. While Sarah spread word to frustrated homeowners, I built an ironclad legal case. Every citation Vivian issued outside HOA boundaries, every false police report, every interference with my property rights, documented with military precision. Tom Bradley proved surprisingly useful. 20 years as a firefighter taught him thorough investigation. He helped create a timeline of Vivian's escalating harassment, complete with photographs, witness statements, and official police reports. The adverse possession attempt was our crown jewel. Martinez's incident report, fraudulent survey documents, and recordings of Vivian's phone conversations about filing false paperwork. Any competent lawyer could destroy her in court. But courts were messy and expensive. I had a better idea. Phase 3, the community confrontation. The HOA's monthly meeting was Thursday at the community center. Perfect timing, since I owned the building they were meeting in. I called the management company requesting agenda time for property rights education. Derek tried to refuse. "Sir, you're not an HOA member. Only residents can address the board." "Son, I'm not just a resident, I'm your landlord. Check your lease agreements." 20 minutes later, Derek called back with a completely different tone. Someone had finally done the title research they should have completed 20 years ago. "Mr. Thornfield, we'd be honored to have you speak." I spent the week preparing with Mrs. Rodriguez and attorney Rebecca Santos. Rebecca examined Uncle Ezra's documentation and whistled. "This is the most comprehensive property rights portfolio I've ever seen. Your uncle could have charged triple the ground lease rates." The presentation was designed to educate, not humiliate. I wanted people understanding their legal situation, learning their rights as lessees and HOA members, and seeing a path forward without lawyers or evictions. But I prepared a backup plan. If Vivian disrupted the meeting or rallied support for continued harassment, I had documents that would end her presidency immediately. The trump card was financial analysis showing HOA money spent on legal fees, harassment campaigns, and fraudulent activities over 2 years. Money from homeowner dues that could have gone to actual community improvements instead of Vivian's personal vendettas. Always keep detailed financial records when dealing with HOA disputes. Misuse of homeowner funds is often the fastest way to remove corrupt board members. Money talks louder than personality conflicts. Wednesday evening, Sarah called with an update that made me smile. "Marcus, word's out about Thursday's meeting. I've talked to 47 families and every single one is attending. People are furious about the ground lease situation, but they're more furious about how much money Vivian's wasted on harassment instead of fixing roads. What about Vivian's supporters? That's the beautiful part. Even her allies are asking questions. Nobody likes discovering they've been paying rent without knowing it, especially when their HOA president has been picking expensive legal fights with their landlord. Thursday morning, I loaded my truck with presentation materials and solutions. The community center parking lot was filling up by 6:30, though the meeting didn't start until 7. Tom Bradley met me at the entrance, grinning like a man about to watch his favorite movie. "You ready for this, Marcus?" I looked at neighbors filing into the building I owned, people living under agreements they didn't understand, governed by a woman who'd forgotten that authority comes with responsibility. The evening air smelled like fresh-cut grass and approaching justice. "Tom, I've been ready my whole life." The community center was packed tighter than a sardine can by 7 p.m. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, even some folks sitting on the floor near the back. The air was thick with tension and too much cologne from the guy next to the coffee station who apparently thought he was attending a dinner party instead of a neighborhood showdown. Vivian sat at the front table with the other board members, looking like a general who'd just realized her army was about to mutiny. She kept glancing at the crowd, then at me, then back at the crowd like she was trying to solve a math problem that kept changing its variables. "Before we begin tonight's meeting," she announced, her voice shakier than usual, "I want to address some rumors that have been circulating about property ownership and lease agreements." Here we go, I thought. She was going to try to get ahead of the story. "Some individuals have been spreading misinformation designed to confuse and frighten our residents. I want to assure everyone that your property ownership is secure and these scare tactics are simply attempts to—" "Point of order," Sarah Finley stood up from the third row, waving a copy of her ground lease agreement. "Mrs. Ashworth, are you saying these county records are fake?" Vivian's face went through more colors than a mood ring. "I'm saying that some people are misinterpreting complex legal documents to serve their own agenda." That's when things got interesting. Mike Finley, Sarah's accountant husband, stood up with a calculator and a stack of papers. "Mrs. Ashworth, I've reviewed our mortgage statements going back 15 years. Can you explain why a portion of our monthly payment has been going to something called Thornfield Ground Lease Trust this entire time?" The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop, or in this case, the sound of Vivian's political career crashing and burning. That's a management company issue. I don't handle the financial details of individual mortgage payments." But the damage was done. 47 families had spent the week discovering they'd been paying rent on land they thought they owned, and now their HOA president was claiming ignorance about basic financial facts. Tom Bradley seized the moment. "Vivian, if you don't know what we're paying for, maybe you shouldn't be making decisions about how our money gets spent." The crowd started murmuring agreement. That's when Vivian made her biggest mistake of the night. She got desperate. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're being manipulated by someone who moved into our community specifically to cause trouble. Mr. Thornfield has made it clear he doesn't respect our community standards or our authority. He's using intimidation tactics and legal technicalities to what?" I stood up slowly, my voice carrying across the room without effort. "To exercise the property rights your own legal documents granted me? You're trying to destroy our community." "Ma'am, I'm trying to educate it. Seems like there's a lot your residents don't know about their own living situation." That's when Vivian played what she thought was her trump card. She pulled out a thick folder and slammed it on the table. "Since Mr. Thornfield wants to discuss legal documents, let's discuss this. I have here a petition signed by 68 homeowners requesting his immediate removal from the area for threatening community safety and property values." The room erupted, people shouting, demanding to see the petition, asking why they hadn't been told about it. In the chaos, I noticed something interesting. Most of the people who looked confused and angry weren't upset at me. They were upset at Vivian. But she wasn't done escalating. Furthermore, we filed formal complaints with the county about Mr. Thornfield's unsafe agricultural practices, unpermitted structures, and harassment of residents. The county has agreed to conduct a full inspection of his property next week. Now she had my attention. Filing false reports with county officials was a felony, and threatening government inspection of legally compliant property was harassment. She'd just crossed from civil disputes into criminal territory. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Mrs. Ashworth, are you stating publicly that you filed false reports with county officials about my property?" "I'm stating that we've filed legitimate safety concerns. About a property you've never been invited to inspect, using complaints you've never verified, targeting someone who's never violated any county codes. The crowd was watching this exchange like a tennis match where one player was about to get obliterated. Your property is a nuisance that threatens our community standards. Ma'am, your community doesn't have authority over my property. Never has, never will. But since you brought up legal documents, I pulled out the ground lease agreements and the foreclosure records Mrs. Rodriguez had copied for me. Time to end this dance once and for all. I think it's time this community learned exactly who owns what around here. Vivian's face went white as fresh snow. She realized she'd just challenged someone to a legal fight while sitting in a building he owned, surrounded by people who'd been paying him rent for 24 years. You can't intimidate us with paperwork. Ma'am, I'm not intimidating anyone. I'm educating them. Something you should have done a long time ago. Vivian's desperation hit peak crazy when she realized she was losing control of her own meeting. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her coffee mug, the brown liquid spreading across the table like a small flood of embarrassment. This meeting is postponed until we can verify Mr. Thornfield's legal standing. Point of order, Mike Finley called out. You can't postpone a meeting just because you don't like the agenda. But Vivian was already gathering her papers, signaling to the other board members. Security concerns require us to— What security concerns? Tom Bradley stood up, his 20 years of firefighting authority evident in his voice. The only security concern I see is an HOA president trying to silence property owners. That's when Vivian made her final, fatal mistake. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right there in front of everyone. Yes, I need police at the Millbrook Heights Community Center. We have an individual making threats and refusing to leave the premises. The room exploded. People shouting, demanding to know what threats, asking why she was calling police on a scheduled speaker. The smell of spilled coffee mixed with rising anger as 200 people realized their HOA president had just lied to emergency services. I stayed calm, kept recording, and waited for the inevitable. Ma'am, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, you just filed a false police report in front of 200 witnesses. That's a felony. Vivian's face went through every shade of panic. You are threatening our community. I'm standing here holding legal documents and speaking in a calm voice. If that's threatening to you, maybe the problem isn't me. Deputy Martinez arrived 15 minutes later with backup, probably expecting to break up some kind of riot. Instead, he walked into a packed meeting where everyone was sitting quietly, watching Vivian pace behind the front table like a caged animal. What seems to be the problem here? Vivian rushed toward him. Officer, this man has been making threats and disrupting our meeting with false legal claims. Martinez looked around the room, then at me sitting calmly with my folder of documents. Sir, have you made any threats tonight? No, sir. I was invited to speak about property rights education. I brought legal documents from the county recorder's office. He's trying to intimidate our residents with fake paperwork. That's when Sarah Finley stood up. Officer, Mrs. Ashworth called 911 because she doesn't like what we're learning about our own property ownership. No one here feels threatened by Mr. Thornfield. Martinez examined the crowd. Is that accurate? Does anyone here feel threatened or unsafe? Silence. Not one person raised their hand or spoke up. Even Vivian's remaining supporters sat quietly, looking embarrassed by her meltdown. Ma'am, Martinez said to Vivian, filing false police reports is a serious offense. Are you sure you want to pursue this complaint? But Vivian had passed the point of rational thinking. He's harassing our entire community. He's violating our covenants. He's destroying our property values. Ma'am, he's not part of your HOA. He can't violate covenants he never agreed to. Martinez had clearly done his homework since our previous encounters. He understood the legal situation better than Vivian did. That's when I decided to end the circus. I stood up and addressed the room. Folks, Mrs. Ashworth seems upset about legal documents she claims are fake. Would you like to hear what these county records actually say? The crowd rumbled agreement. Crowd rumbled. Even some of the board members were nodding. I opened the folder and pulled out the foreclosure deed from 1995. 29 years ago, the original developer of this subdivision went bankrupt. The bank foreclosed on everything. The developed lots, the common areas, the roads, everything. I held up the document so people could see the official seals. My great-uncle Ezra Thornfield bought the entire foreclosure package for $1.97 on the dollar. The room went dead quiet. You could hear the air conditioning humming and someone's stomach growling near the back. That means for the past 24 years, every family in this subdivision has been living under ground lease agreements. You own your houses, but Uncle Ezra owned the land underneath them. I pulled out the ground lease documentation. These agreements automatically renewed every year, with monthly lease payments built into your mortgage statements. Money you've been paying without realizing it. Vivian was shaking her head violently. That's impossible. We own our lots. Ma'am, you can check with any title company. Ground leases are perfectly legal and more common than people think. I looked around the room at faces showing confusion, anger, and dawning understanding. Here's the important part. Those ground lease agreements include behavior clauses, harassment of the lessor, filing false legal claims, interfering with property rights. Those are all violations that can result in lease termination. The implications hit the room like a cold wave. If I wanted to be vindictive, I could evict every family who'd participated in or supported Vivian's harassment campaign. But Uncle Ezra left me specific instructions. He didn't want me to use this power to hurt people. He wanted me to use it to fix what's broken. I pulled out Uncle Ezra's final letter and read the key passage aloud. Make them partners, not enemies. The neighborhood needs a leader, not a landlord. So here's what I'm proposing. We restructure this community as a genuine partnership. Transparent budgets, elected oversight, fair enforcement of reasonable rules, and an end to harassment campaigns against anyone. The crowd started murmuring, people turning to each other, processing what they'd just learned. The alternative is we settle this in court, where lawyers will get rich and everyone else will get screwed. That's when Tom Bradley started clapping. Then Sarah Finley joined in. Within 30 seconds, the entire room was applauding except for Vivian and two remaining board members. Deputy Martinez approached Vivian. Ma'am, I need to speak with you about filing false reports. The applause died down as Deputy Martinez led Vivian toward the exit for questioning about her false 911 call, but she wasn't going quietly. At the doorway, she turned around and screamed at the crowd with the fury of someone watching their empire crumble. You're all making a terrible mistake. This man is going to destroy everything we've built here. That's when the local news crew arrived. David Park from Channel 7, along with a cameraman and reporter I didn't recognize, walked through the door just as Vivian was having her public meltdown. Perfect timing that couldn't have been better if I'd scripted it myself. We received reports of a community dispute, David said, camera already rolling. Can someone explain what's happening here? Vivian immediately rushed toward the camera like a moth to flame. This is Vivian Ashworth, president of Millbrook Heights HOA. We're dealing with an individual who's trying to intimidate our residents with fraudulent legal documents. David turned to me. Sir, would you care to respond? The room fell silent as I stood up, holding Uncle Ezra's documents. The camera's red recording light felt like a spotlight, but I'd briefed enough military operations to know how to speak clearly under pressure. My name is Marcus Thornfield. These documents from the county recorder's office show that I inherited ownership of this subdivision's roads and the ground leases for every residential lot. Mrs. Ashworth has spent 2 months harassing me for exercising my legal property rights. That's a lie, Vivian shrieked from behind the camera. He's trying to steal our community. David examined the documents I handed him, his eyebrows rising as he read. These appear to be official county records. Can you explain what ground leases mean for homeowners? It means they own their houses but lease the land underneath. They've been paying lease fees through their mortgages for 24 years without knowing it. The camera panned across the crowd of stunned faces. Sarah Finley stood up and addressed the reporter directly. We had no idea about any of this until this week. Our HOA president never told us we were essentially renting our land. Mike Finley joined his wife. We've been paying into something called Thornfield Ground Lease Trust for 15 years. When we asked Mrs. Ashworth about it tonight, she claimed ignorance. The camera swung back to Vivian, who was now visibly sweating under the lights. I don't handle individual mortgage details. That's not my responsibility. But you are responsible for knowing basic facts about your community's legal structure, aren't you? David asked. That's when Tom Bradley dropped the bomb that ended everything. She's also responsible for filing false police reports. Mrs. Ashworth called 911 tonight claiming Mr. Thornfield was making threats. As you can see, he's standing here calmly with legal documents while she's the one screaming and disrupting the meeting. Deputy Martinez stepped back into frame. I can confirm that the 911 call appears to have been without merit. No threats were made, and Mr. Thornfield was invited to speak at this meeting. David turned to Vivian for response, but she was already backpedaling toward the door. This is harassment. You're all conspiring against me. Ma'am, I called out, my voice carrying across the room and into the camera microphone. Nobody's conspiring against you. We're just asking you to follow the same rules you've been forcing on everyone else. What rules? I pulled out the stack of citations she'd issued me over the past 2 months. Respect for property rights, honest communication with residents, following legal procedures instead of making up your own. The camera zoomed in as I held up citation after citation. $250 for flying the American flag, $100 for parking my truck in my own driveway, $50 for having dandelions on a working ranch. You're not part of our community. Ma'am, according to these ground lease agreements, I don't just live in your community, I own it. The room erupted in nervous laughter and scattered applause. Even some of the board members were shaking their heads at Vivian's behavior. David stepped closer with his microphone. Mr. Thornfield, what are your intentions now that this ownership situation has been revealed? This was the moment Uncle Ezra had prepared me for. The chance to be vindictive or to be a leader. I looked around the room at 200 people who were watching their understanding of their own lives get turned upside down. My great-uncle left me instructions to be a partner, not a dictator. I'm proposing we restructure this community based on transparency, fairness, and mutual respect. And if people don't agree to that restructuring, I shrugged. Then we'll settle it in court and lawyers will get rich while everyone else gets screwed. But I'd rather work together than fight each other. Vivian made one final desperate play. You can't force us to accept your demands. I turned to face her directly, the camera capturing every word. Ma'am, I'm not forcing anything. I'm offering partnership instead of landlord-tenant relationships. But if you prefer the alternative, I pulled out the lease termination notices I'd prepared as backup. I can start eviction proceedings tomorrow morning. Your choice. The room went dead silent. Vivian's face cycled through shock, anger, fear, and finally defeat. Deputy Martinez stepped forward. Ma'am, I need you to come with me now. As Vivian was escorted out for questioning about filing false reports, the camera captured her final words. This isn't over. I looked directly into the camera lens. Yes, ma'am, it is. 6 months later, Millbrook Heights had transformed into something Uncle Ezra would have been proud of. The HOA had been restructured into the Millbrook Community Partnership, with elected representatives, transparent budgets, and rules that actually made sense. Property values had increased 12%, not because of strict enforcement, but because people actually wanted to live in a neighborhood where neighbors helped each other instead of fighting. I was sitting on my front porch, watching kids play in the new community garden we'd built on the corner lot that used to be decorative green space only. The smell of tomatoes and fresh herbs mixed with the sound of laughter, creating the kind of atmosphere Uncle Ezra had always envisioned. My morning coffee tasted better knowing it was brewed with water from wells I owned, flowing to homes where people now understood exactly what they were paying for. Tom Bradley walked up the gravel driveway, carrying 2 bottles of beer even though it wasn't even noon yet. After the events of the past year, we'd earned the right to celebrate whenever we wanted. Got some interesting news from downtown, he said, settling into the rocking chair I'd built from wood reclaimed from the old barn. Vivian's court case wrapped up yesterday. How'd that turn out? Plea bargain, 6 months community service, fine for filing false reports, and she's banned from serving on any HOA board in the county for 5 years. I took a long sip of coffee and watched a red-tailed hawk circle over the fields behind my property. Think she learned anything from all this? Doubt it, but the rest of the neighborhood sure did. He was right about that. Sarah Finley had been elected as the first president of the community partnership, running on a platform of transparency and common sense. Mike Finley handled the books, ensuring every penny of community funds was accounted for and spent on actual improvements rather than harassment campaigns. The old HOA office had been converted into a community resource center where people could access Wi-Fi, borrow tools, or just gather for coffee and conversation. The building's conference room displayed a framed copy of Uncle Ezra's letter, reminding everyone that real leadership meant serving the community, not controlling it. Marcus, Tom said, you ever think about what would have happened if you'd just moved away when Vivian started her nonsense? I thought about that plenty over the past months. Probably would have found some other property owner to bully, maybe someone without Uncle Ezra's documents to fight back with. So you did this neighborhood a favor. We all did ourselves a favor. Sometimes standing up to bullies is the only way to stop them from creating more victims. The sound of gravel crunching announced Sarah Finley's arrival. She'd gotten into the habit of stopping by every few weeks to update me on community business. even though I'd made it clear that the partnership should run itself without needing my approval. "Morning, Marcus." "Tom." She climbed the porch steps, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her during the Vivian years. "Got the quarterly budget report if you want to look it over." "Sarah, I keep telling you, you don't need my permission to spend community money on community needs." "I know, but transparency works both ways. You own the infrastructure, so you should know how we're maintaining it." The budget was impressive. Road maintenance costs had dropped 40% because we'd eliminated the expensive legal fees and harassment campaigns that used to drain community funds. The savings had been redirected to actual improvements: playground equipment, walking trails, and a community workshop where people could borrow tools or work on projects together. "There's something else," Sarah said, pulling out a letter. "We got contacted by 3 other HOAs dealing with similar situations. They want to know how we restructured our community governance." Similar situations? Corrupt board members, harassment campaigns, residents who didn't understand their property rights. Apparently, our story made the rounds on social media and property rights websites. I read through the letters from communities in Ohio, Florida, and California. Each one described HOA overreach, financial mismanagement, and residents who felt powerless against petty dictators masquerading as community leaders. "What do you think we should tell them?" "Same thing Uncle Ezra taught me. Knowledge is power, but wisdom is knowing how to use that power to help people instead of hurting them." Tom raised his beer bottle. To Uncle Ezra, man had more foresight than a weather satellite. To Uncle Ezra, Sarah agreed, and to communities that work together instead of fighting each other. I raised my coffee mug. To the idea that neighbors should be partners, not adversaries. As we sat there enjoying the morning breeze, I noticed something that would have made Uncle Ezra smile. 3 kids from different families were working together in the community garden, teaching each other how to plant seeds and sharing tools without being asked. Their parents were chatting nearby, planning a block party for next weekend. This was what Uncle Ezra had really left me. Not just legal documents and property rights, but the opportunity to help create something better than what came before. My phone buzzed with a text message. Another community asking for advice about HOA reform. I handed the phone to Sarah. "Think you can handle this one without me?" She grinned. "Marcus, we've been handling things without you for months. You just gave us the tools to do it right." The afternoon sun was warming the porch, and somewhere down the street I could hear the sound of neighbors helping each other with yard work. Uncle Ezra's legacy wasn't about owning property, it was about understanding that real ownership means taking care of what matters most. So here's my advice for anyone dealing with HOA nightmares. Document everything, know your rights, and never be afraid to stand up for what's correct. Sometimes the best way to fix a broken system is to remind people that communities work best when everyone has a voice. Drop a comment below and tell me about your own HOA horror stories. Trust me, you're not alone in dealing with power-hungry neighbors who've forgotten that authority should serve the community, not control it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about regular people standing up to corruption and actually winning. Next week, I'll tell you about the town council that tried to seize a veteran's property for a parking lot until they discovered he owned the mineral rights under their city hall.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.